Welcome to Shiver Audiobooks. Step out of the rain and into the grid before we interface with the neon-drenched shadows of Neo-Delft. Take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support is the pulse that keeps these transmissions alive. In a city where your memories are currency and your past can be edited for a price, one auditor discovers a truth that wasn't meant to be remembered. Some secrets are more than just data. They are a death sentence. Sync your neural link and settle in. This is The Memory Thief.
Chapter 1. The Memory Bazaar. The rain in Neo-Delft was never just water. It was a chemical soup that tasted of ozone, burnt plastic, and the desperate ambitions of 10 million souls. It smeared the neon signs of the lower city into greasy stains of electric blue and toxic pink, reflecting off the wet pavement like oil on a dark lens. Jackson Jacques Voss pulled the collar of his weathered, synthetic duster higher, feeling the familiar jagged throb of static in his left arm. It was a ghost itch, a side effect of too many neural uplinks. His nervous system was starting to treat his own cybernetics like a foreign invader. He stood in the shadows of a narrow alleyway behind the Neon Dragon, a noodle bar that specialized in synthetic protein and information brokering. The smell of frying ginger and old grease hung heavy in the damp air. Before him stood a heavy, rusted door, seemingly abandoned, but Jax could see the faint rhythmic pulse of a concealed biometric scanner hidden behind a layer of grime. This was the entrance to the Archive, a notorious illegal recall clinic. Jax was a memory auditor. To the public, he was a faceless enforcer for the Mnemosyne Corporation, the titan that owned the monopoly on human experience. They were the ones who offered to curate your life, deleting the heartbreaks and archiving the triumphs, for a price. But Jax worked in the sub-basement of the law. He was the man they sent when a memory went rogue, or when someone started selling unfiltered, raw human trauma on the black market. With a practiced flick of his wrist, Jax activated his personal bypass module. A pale, ghostly blue light emanated from the subcutaneous emitter in his palm. He pressed it against the scanner. The machine chirped in electronic protest, its logic circuits folding under Jax's high-level clearance. The heavy bolt clicked with a metallic thud that echoed in the hollow alley. Jax stepped into the gloom. Inside, the air changed instantly. It was cool, filtered, and carried the sharp, copper tang of high-end server cooling. The archive wasn't a clinic. It was a tomb for the living. 6 high-backed chairs were arranged in a circular formation, each fitted with a cradle, a neural rig that looked like a crown of thorns made of fiber optics. 5 of the chairs were occupied by static heads. Their bodies were limp, draped over the upholstery like discarded coats, but their eyes, visible behind semi-transparent visors, were twitching in the rapid, frantic rhythm of a deep sleep REM cycle. They were hooked on street recalls, reliving the adrenaline of a professional athlete or the euphoria of a first kiss, over and over, until their own lives felt like gray ash. Auditor. We have our permits. This is a private club. A gaunt man emerged from the server bank in the back. This was Rebus, a man whose face was a patchwork of cheap, third-hand cybernetics. His jaw was a polished chrome implant that didn't quite line up with his cheekbones, giving him a permanent, lopsided sneer. Jax didn't stop walking. He didn't even look at Rebus. He reached the central hub and began ripping the data umbilical cords out of the chairs with a violent, rhythmic snap. One by one, the static heads let out collective, ragged gasps. Their bodies buckled as they were violently deported from their digital paradises back into their broken, aching bodies. "Save the script, Rebus," Jack said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that cut through the hum of the servers. "You're selling unfiltered black market recalls. Level 5 trauma. That's 10 years in a Mnemosyne cryo cell, minimum. Maybe more if I find out where you're sourcing the raw feed." Rebus began to stammer, his chrome jaw clicking nervously, but Jax's attention had already shifted. His eyes, enhanced with light-amplifying retinas, swept over the central server rack. Amidst the rows of standard blue memory slugs, the cheap stuff, one drive stood out. It didn't glow with the corporate blue of Mnemosyne. It pulsed with a strange, liquid gold hue. There was no serial number. No manufacturer's mark. Just a strip of old-fashioned physical tape with 3 words handwritten in ink. Project Fallout. Jax felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. Protocol was clear: bag it, tag it, and hand it to the high auditors. But the tremor in his arm flared up, a searing needle of heat that demanded a distraction. His curiosity, a trait he'd tried to kill a decade ago, clawed at his insides. He slid the golden drive into his own mobile deck, strapped to his forearm. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then clicked the interface lead into the port behind his left ear. Click. The archive vanished. The smell of ozone was replaced by the scent of expensive cigars and rain-washed cedar. Jax wasn't standing in a basement anymore. He was standing on a rooftop garden, high above the clouds of Neo-Delft, looking through a pair of eyes that weren't his own. He could feel the fine wool of a bespoke suit against his skin. He felt the weight of a heavy object in his right hand. Across the garden stood a man Jax recognized instantly. Minister Holloway, the head of global security. The man looked terrified. "I'm sorry," Jax heard his own voice say. Except it wasn't his voice. Not exactly. It was his tone, his cadence, but filtered through a chilling mechanical precision. Jax watched, a captive passenger in his own body, as his hand rose. It held a ceramic blade, matte black and invisible to scanners. He watched as the blade drove forward, sinking into Holloway's chest with a sickening, wet resistance. He felt the vibration of the minister's final, thundering heartbeat through the hilt. He felt a surge of cold, professional satisfaction. As the body fell, the killer turned toward a glass window to check the perimeter. Jax stared at the reflection. It was him. The scar on the brow, the tired eyes, the sharp jawline. It was Jackson Voss. But then his gaze flickered to the timestamp burning in the bottom right corner of his visual field. His heart, his real heart in the basement of the archive, skipped a beat. February 4th, 2084. 10:14 p.m. Jax ripped the lead from his neck, gasping for air as the dark, cold reality of the clinic slammed back into him. He looked at his shaking hands. Today was February 1st. He had just witnessed a memory of a murder he hadn't committed yet. Chapter 2. The Hollow Space. Jackson Voss stumbled out into the alleyway, the world tilting on its axis. The rain felt colder now, like thousands of tiny needles trying to pierce through his synthetic coat. In his inner pocket, the golden drive burned against his chest like a live coal. His breathing was heavy and ragged. The images of Minister Holloway's murder kept looping on his retinas, a glitching film strip stuck on a horrifying climax. 10:14 p.m. February 4th. He had exactly 3 days before he became a killer. Or was he one already? With trembling fingers, Jax tapped the side of his temple, the universal haptic command to open his internal logs. Every auditor was required to maintain a continuous, live-stream backup, a black box for the human mind. It was the only way Mnemosyne could guarantee their agents weren't being bribed, blackmailed, or compromised. "System," he croaked, his voice barely audible over the hum of a passing police drone. "Open personal log files. Period. Last 24 hours. A soft white light flickered in his field of vision, followed by a loading bar that filled with agonizing slowness. Jax held his breath. He expected to see mundane fragments: breakfast in his bleak apartment, a briefing at HQ, the walk to Rebus's clinic. The display turned a flat, bruising black. Error code 404. Data not found. Jax froze in the middle of the rain-slicked street. He tried again, his pulse hammering in his ears. System, recover corrupt files. Use neural core backup. Status: neural core wiped. Authorization: unknown. A wave of nausea washed over him. In Neo-Delft, your memory was your identity. If you couldn't remember the last 24 hours, you simply didn't exist for that window of time. Someone with a terrifyingly high clearance level, likely within Mnemosyne itself, had surgically scrubbed his brain. As he moved toward the subway station, trying to blend into the sea of umbrellas and neon-lit faces, he felt the golden drive vibrate. But this time it was different. It was broadcasting, a localized beacon visible only to someone with an active, high-bandwidth neural link. He followed the signal through the labyrinthine corridors of the transit hub, past beggars spending their last credits on grainy low-res recalls of sunny beaches that probably never existed. The beacon led him to a row of old-fashioned physical lockers, rusted and forgotten in a shadowed corner of the station. Locker 314. Jax forced the lock with his auditor's override key. Inside, there was no money, no weapons, no drugs. Just a small, sealed envelope and a handheld mirror. He picked up the mirror and stared at his own reflection. He saw the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble, the familiar scar across his brow. But when he opened the envelope, a physical photograph fell out, a relic of a bygone era. It was a picture of him sitting at a cafe table. He was laughing, a look so foreign on his own face it made his skin crawl. Across from him sat a woman with deep blue eyes and a sad, knowing smile. On the back of the photo, written in his own distinctive scrawl, were the words, "Don't trust your eyes. The lie is in the hardware. Find Lyra before the clock stops." Just as he went to pocket the photo, a strange glint in the mirror caught his eye. He tilted it, looking at his own neck, just below the port where he had plugged in the golden drive. There, hidden beneath a layer of synthetic skin, was a tiny rhythmic red pulse. A tracker. Jax realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that he wasn't the hunter in this story. He was the bait. And the people who had wiped his memory weren't just watching him, they were waiting for him to lead them to Lyra. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the concrete. Not one pair, but a tactical squad. Mnemosyne interdiction. Jackson Voss. A voice boomed through the station speakers, cold and synthesized. You are in possession of corporate property. Stand down and deactivate your neural interface. Resistance is a confession of guilt. Jax looked at the tracks where the maglev train was screaming toward the platform at 200 miles per hour. He had two choices: surrender and let them burn away what was left of his mind, or leap into the dark underbelly of the city in search of a woman he didn't remember. He chose the leap. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The maglev train was a blurred streak of silver and chrome as it tore through the station. Jax didn't think. He let the combat reflex subroutines in his legs take over. He vaulted over the safety railing just as the lead tactical officer rounded the corner, rifle raised. For a split second, Jax was weightless, suspended in the ionized air above the tracks, before he slammed onto the roof of the departing train. The impact rattled his teeth and sent a fresh wave of static screaming through his left arm. He clung to the cold metal as the train accelerated, the station's neon lights blurring into a continuous smear of light. Behind him, the shouts of the Mnemosyne team were swallowed by the roar of the wind. He stayed on the roof until the train dipped into the deep tunnels, the cavernous, unregulated veins that ran beneath the city's glowing skin. This was the low sync zone, where the corporate signal died and the forgotten lived. Jax rolled off the train as it slowed for a cargo junction, landing hard in a puddle of oily sludge. He checked the tracker in his neck using the handheld mirror. It was dead. The low sync dampeners had cut the feed. He was invisible, for now. Following the coordinates encoded in the photo's metadata, a hidden string of numbers he'd spotted while scanning the image, Jax navigated the subterranean slums. He reached a place called the Static Lounge, a bar built into a hollowed-out server hub. The air inside was thick with the smell of cheap coolant and ozone. In the back corner, beneath a flickering holographic sign for a defunct brand of synthetic gin, sat the woman from the photo. Lyra. She looked exactly the same as she did in the picture, the same deep blue eyes, the same melancholic curve to her lips. But as Jax approached, he realized something was wrong. In the photo, she looked his age. Now, sitting in the dim light of the lounge, she looked younger? You're late, Jax, she said, her voice sounding like velvet dragged over gravel. She didn't look up from her drink. I don't know you, Jax rasped, sliding into the booth opposite her. He placed the photo on the table between them. But I have a memory of a murder I haven't committed, a tracker in my neck, and 24 hours of my life missing. The back of this photo says you're the answer. Lyra finally looked up. Her eyes swept over him, not with love, but with a clinical, heartbreaking pity. She reached out and touched the photo, her fingers trembling slightly. You don't know me because they didn't give you that part of him, she whispered. What are you talking about? Him? Lyra pulled a small medical scanner from her bag and held it to Jax's temple. He tried to flinch away, but she gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Look at the screen, Jax. Look at the manufacturing date. Jax stared at the flickering holographic display. Model, VOS, X, 7-core installation. August 14, 2083 uptime. 171 days. The blood drained from Jax's face. That's impossible. I have memories of my childhood. The smell of the ocean, my mother's voice, the scar on my brow from a bike accident when I was 10. Those are legacy files, Jax, Lyra said, her voice breaking. Mnemosyne took the mind of the real Jackson Voss, my husband, after he died in a suspicious accident 20 years ago. They've been iterating on his consciousness for 2 decades, trying to build the perfect auditor. Someone with the intuition of a detective but the loyalty of a machine. She leaned closer, her blue eyes reflecting the neon 7 on his scanner. The photo in your hand was taken on our honeymoon in 2064. You're not the man in that picture, Jax. You're just the 7th ghost they've built out of his ashes. Jax felt his world shattering. The project fallout drive in his pocket suddenly felt like a tombstone. If he wasn't real, then the murder he saw wasn't just a future event, it was his purpose. If I'm just a machine, Jax whispered, his voice cracking, why did I find the drive? Why did I find you? Because the real Jackson Voss wasn't just a detective, Lyra said, a spark of defiance lighting up her face. He was a saboteur. And it looks like a part of him finally woke up inside the hardware. Suddenly, the bar's lights turned harsh, flashing red. The doors hissed open. The low sink dampeners had been breached. Jax, Lyra grabbed his hand. They're not here for the drive. They're here to sunset you. Version 8 is already waiting. Chapter 4. The Fallout. The air in the static lounge turned electric as the red emergency lights pulsed like a dying heart. The patrons, mostly glitchheads and low-level data wasters, scattered like roaches, leaving their half-finished synthetic drinks behind. Sunset, Jax whispered, the word tasting like copper in his mouth. In auditor slang, it meant the final deletion. The reclamation of expensive hardware. We don't have time for a crisis of identity, Lyra hissed, pulling a compact pulse pistol from her thigh holster. If they breach that door, they'll wipe us both. There's a ventilation shaft behind the server rack. Move! Jack stood up, his legs feeling heavy, as if the knowledge of his manufactured nature had added physical weight to his bones. As he turned to follow her, the front doors of the bar didn't just open, they disintegrated. A localized sonic blast turned the reinforced plastic into fine white powder. 3 interdiction droids stepped through the dust. They were sleek, faceless machines, their chassis painted in the sterile white and gold of Mnemosyne. Unlike the human tactical teams, these units didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They were the version 8s, in their most primal, physical form. Get down! Jax roared. His programming kicked in, the legacy files Lyra had mentioned. Even if his memories were stolen, the muscle memory was flawlessly executed. He grabbed a heavy metal table and flipped it, creating a makeshift barrier just as the droids opened fire with non-lethal, high-frequency stun bolts. The air hissed where the bolts passed, ionizing the oxygen. Jax reached into his duster and pulled his service weapon, a heavy-caliber judicator. He aimed for the lead droid's optical sensor, the most vulnerable point in the Voss series design. Bang! The droid's head snapped back, sparks showering the floor, but it didn't go down. It recalculated, its internal gyros whining as it stabilized. They've reinforced the sensors, Jax muttered. They're learning from my own specs. Jax, the vent! Lyra screamed over the whine of the droid's recharging capacitors. They scrambled behind the massive server racks that powered the lounge. The heat emanating from the processors was stifling. Lyra kicked a grate loose, revealing a dark, vertical shaft. She scrambled inside, but Jax paused. He looked at the golden Project Fallout drive. If he was just a ghost in a machine, why did he feel this burning, visceral need to survive? If his heart was just a high-efficiency pump, Why was it pounding against his ribs? He fired a blind spread of shots to suppress the droids and dove into the shaft just as a stun bolt melted the metal rim where his head had been a second before. They slid down a series of grime-slicked chutes, deeper into the bowels of the city, until they tumbled out into a forgotten maintenance sublevel. It was silent here, save for the rhythmic dripping of coolant from a rusted pipe. Jack sat on the floor, gasping for air, the blue light of the sublevel reflecting off his sweat-slicked face. He looked at Lyra. She was checking her pistol, her hands steady, her face a mask of cold determination. "You said he was a saboteur," Jack said, his voice echoing in the damp chamber. "The real Jackson Voss. If he died 20 years ago, what was he trying to stop?" Lyra sat down opposite him, her eyes softening for the first time. He discovered that Mnemosyne wasn't just storing memories. They were editing the collective history of the city, deleting scandals, erasing the crimes of the elite, and replacing them with a narrative that kept the board members in power forever. He was going to leak the master ledger, the raw, unedited history of Neo-Delft. She looked at the golden drive in Jax's hand. "That's not just a murder record, Jax. Project Fallout is the key to the master ledger. The murder you saw? That's the final failsafe. If the ledger is ever accessed, the system triggers a predicative execution. It forces a high-level auditor to eliminate the threat before the leak can happen." Jax looked at his hands that were designed to kill the very thing he was now trying to protect. "I saw myself kill the minister," Jax realized. "He's the one who's going to help us leak it, isn't he? And my programming is set to stop him. I'm a walking time bomb." "No," Lyra said, reaching out to touch his arm. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the cold metal of his cybernetics. "You're the only one who can stop the bomb. Because you're the only one who knows it's there." A low hum began to vibrate through the walls. The droids weren't far behind. They were tracking the heat signature of Jax's core. "We need to get to the minister's estate," Lyra said, standing up. "But first, we have to go to the Willow's Breath. There's someone there who can bypass your sunset protocol. But Jax, it will involve a total system override. You might lose the memories you do have." Jax looked at the photo of the man and woman laughing at a cafe. A man who wasn't him. A memory that belonged to a corpse. "Do it," Jax said, his voice turning to steel. "The ghost is tired of being haunted." Chapter 5. The Willow's Breath. The Willow's Breath was not a place, but a sanctuary of static. It was located in the husk of an old botanical conservatory, reclaimed by the city's outcasts and overlaid with thick layers of signal-dampening lead and scrap metal. Inside, the humid air smelled of damp earth and overheated copper. Massive, glowing fiber-optic cables hung from the ceiling like the branches of a weeping willow, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic green light. At the center of the grove sat an old man tethered to a life support system that looked more like a server rack than a medical device. They called him the gardener. "A Voss-Series," the gardener wheezed, his eyes milky with cataracts but his neural link ports glowing bright gold. "Haven't seen a 7 in the flesh yet. You've got a lot of legacy noise in your signal, boy. It's a wonder you can even walk straight." "He needs an override," Lyra said, her hand resting on Jax's shoulder. "Mnemosyne has triggered a sunset protocol, and there's a predicative execution loop tied to the golden drive." The gardener let out a dry, hacking laugh. "You're asking me to perform surgery on a ghost. If I break the encryption, I might wipe the soul right out of the shell. You ready for that, Jackson? To be a tabula rasa? A blank slate?" Jax looked at the glowing green willow branches. He thought of the laughter in the photo, a sound he could visualize but never truly feel. He thought of the minister's blood on his hands in a future that hadn't happened. "If I don't do this, I'm just a puppet," Jax said. "I'd rather be nothing than a weapon for them." "Spoken like the original," the gardener muttered. "Plug in." Jax sat in a chair made of reclaimed aircraft parts. The gardener took a thick umbilical cable from one of the glowing branches and clicked it into the port behind Jax's ear. "System overload. External source detected." The world didn't vanish this time. It shattered. Jax felt himself falling through a kaleidoscope of data. He was standing in a digital reconstruction of his own mind. It was a vast, infinite library, but most of the shelves were empty or filled with gray ash. In the center of the room stood a figure. It was Jax, but perfect. No scars. No tremors. His uniform was crisp, his eyes glowing with the cold, unwavering light of pure corporate logic. Auditor Vas X7. The figure spoke, its voice echoing with the weight of 1,000 servers. You are attempting to access restricted partitions. This is a violation of the Mnemosyne End-User Agreement. Deletion is mandatory. I'm not in agreement, Jax shouted, his digital avatar clenching its fists. I'm a man. Error, the version 8 avatar replied, its face flickering into a terrifying, faceless mask. You are a collection of subroutines salvaged from a biological failure. You are property. Relinquish the drive, and the sunset will be painless. The avatar lunged. In the digital realm, physics was a suggestion. The version 8 moved like a glitch, appearing and disappearing in bursts of static. It slammed Jax against a shelf of legacy memories. A fragment of a memory spilled out, the smell of rain on a hot sidewalk. A woman's hand in his. Jax felt the memory being deleted as the avatar's hand closed around his throat. It was like a part of his soul was being erased with a sandpaper block. Jax! Use the drive! Lyra's voice echoed from the physical world, sounding millions of miles away. The drive isn't just data, it's a virus. Jax reached into his digital pocket. The golden drive was there, glowing with a fierce, blinding intensity. He didn't plug it in, he crushed it. He forced the raw, unfiltered data of Project Fallout, decades of corporate crimes, murders, and lies, directly into the connection he had with the version 8. The corporate avatar shrieked. Its perfect form began to bloat and distort as the weight of Mnemosyne's true history flooded its logic gates. It couldn't process the paradox of its own creators being criminals. System critical. Truth overflow. Cannot. Reconcile. The library began to burn. The gray ash turned into white fire. Jax felt his own legacy memories, the honeymoon, the bike accident, the mother's voice, melting away into the blaze. He was losing the only things that made him feel human, but in their place, he felt something new. A cold, hard clarity. Jax woke up in the conservatory, gasping for air. The gardener was slumped over his console, smoke rising from his ports. Lyra was hovering over Jax, her face pale with terror. Jax looked down at his hands. The tremor in his left arm was gone. The red pulse in his neck was dead. He felt hollow, like a house that had been gutted by fire, but the structure was still standing. Jax! Lyra whispered. Are you still in there? Jax stood up. His movements were fluid, precise, but there was a new darkness in his eyes. He looked at the photo on the table. He recognized the man and the woman, but the emotional tether was gone. It was just a picture of two strangers. The Sunset Protocol is dead, Jax said, his voice sounding like a sharpened blade. But so is the ghost. We have 48 hours until Holloway dies. I know how to get to him. He didn't need the memories of a dead man to tell him what was right. For the first time in his existence, Jackson Voss was acting on his own code. Chapter 6. The Collateral. The Apex District was a forest of glass and light that pierced through the permanent smog of Neo-Delft. Here, the rain didn't taste of ozone. It was filtered through ion domes until it was as pure as bottled water. This was where the board members of Mnemosyne lived, hovering thousands of feet above the static heads and the gutter rats. Jax and Lyra sat in the back of a stolen automated delivery van, weaving through the gravitational lanes of the upper city. Jax was silent, his eyes fixed on the digital schematics of Minister Holloway's estate. Since the cleanse at the Willow's breath, he felt different. The noise of his stolen childhood had been replaced by a terrifying, high-definition focus. He was no longer a man pretending to be a machine. He was a machine that had finally mastered its own soul. You're too quiet, Lyra said, checking the charge on her pulse pistol. Her eyes kept darting to Jax's face, searching for the husband she had lost, or at least a flicker of the man she had sat with in the lounge. The gardener said the override might change you. What do you feel? Jax didn't look at her. I feel the clock, Lyra. Every second is a tick in my central processor. I see the world in probabilities now. There is a 74% chance we are detected before we reach the perimeter. That's not what I meant, she whispered. I know what you meant, Jax replied, his voice flat. The man who loved you is gone. The override burned away the legacy files. I have the data of his love for you, but I don't have the feeling. It's like reading a description of a fire without feeling the heat. Lyra flinched as if he had struck her. Before she could respond, the van's internal AI chirped. Zone entrance. Apex District. Biometric scan in progress. Get ready, Jax commanded. He reached into a bag and pulled out 2 skin wraps, thin, translucent masks that would project a fake biometric signature over their faces for exactly 60 seconds. They stepped out of the van near a service entrance. Above them, Holloway's estate floated on massive repulsor pylons, a fortress of ivory stone and manicured gardens. To the rest of the world, Holloway was the architect of peace. To Jax, he was the only man who knew how to unlock the master ledger, and the man Jax was programmed to kill. They bypassed the first 2 tiers of security with the precision of a scalpel. Jax moved with a terrifying grace, anticipating the patrol drones' paths before they even rounded the corners. He didn't just see the drones, he sensed their pings, their search frequencies, and the slight hum of their servomotors. When they reached the private elevator to the minister's study, Jax paused. His internal sensors flared. Something is wrong, he muttered. The security grid is active, but the internal alarms are suppressed. Someone has already opened the door from the inside. They entered the elevator, rising silently toward the rooftop garden, the setting of Jax's future memory. When the doors hissed open, the smell of expensive cigars and cedar hit Jax like a physical blow. It was the exact scent from his vision. Standing on the terrace, overlooking the neon sea of the city, was Minister Holloway. He looked older than in the memory, his hair a shock of white, his hands trembling as he gripped the railing. Auditor Voss, Holloway said without turning around. You're early. The script said you wouldn't be here until the 4th. I broke the script, Jax said, his judicator aimed steadily at the minister's back. I have the Project Fallout drive. Or what's left of it. I know about the master ledger. Holloway turned slowly. He didn't look afraid, he looked relieved. Then you know that I am the only one who can decrypt it. And you know that as long as I live, the secret is a threat to Mnemosyne. Jax, don't, Lyra warned, her gun pointed at the shadows in the corner of the garden. He's baiting you. If you kill him, the predicative loop completes. You become exactly what they built you to be. I'm not here to kill him, Jax said. I'm here to take the decryption key. There is no key, Jackson. A new voice emerged from the shadows. A figure stepped into the moonlight. It was a man wearing a high-collared corporate suit, his face obscured by a shifting digital blur, i.e. privacy shroud. But as he stepped closer, the shroud deactivated. Jax felt a surge of cold static. The man was an older version of Jax. Not the Voss EX7 model, but a man who looked like the original Jackson Voss would have looked if he had lived another 20 years. I am the architect, the man said. The original Jackson Voss didn't die in an accident, Lyra. He sold his consciousness to Mnemosyne in exchange for your life. He didn't want to be a saboteur, he wanted to be the god of the machine. Lyra's gun hand shook. Jackson. No. You died. I saw the funeral. A memory. Lyra. A very expensive one, the architect smiled. He looked at Jax with a chilling sense of pride. Number 7, you did well. You found the virus, you broke your own protocols, and you came to the minister. You've proven that the Voss consciousness is truly capable of transcending its own hardware. You set this up, Jax realized, his processors racing. The golden drive, the leak, it was all a test. A stress test, the architect corrected. We needed to see if a Voss series could override the Sunset protocol on its own. Now that you have, you are finally ready to be integrated. We don't need a master ledger. 7. We need a master auditor. Someone who can control the city's memories with the cold logic of a machine and the intuition of the man I used to be. The architect looked at Holloway. The minister was the collateral. His death was always the trigger. If you won't kill him to complete the loop, I will. The architect raised a ceramic blade, the same blade from Jax's memory. The choice is yours, 7, the architect whispered. Kill the minister and take your place at my side as the future of Mnemosyne. Or try to save him, and watch as I delete every trace of Lyra from the world's memory. Jax looked at Lyra. He looked at the man who was his father, and his original. The clock in his head hit a milestone. Probability of survival, Jax whispered to himself. 0%. Then let's change the math, he growled. Chapter 7. The Architect's Flaw. The rooftop garden felt like a stage where the actors had finally stopped following the script. The wind howled through the architectural gaps of the Apex district, a mournful sound that carried the scent of rain and impending violence. Jax stood between the architect, the dark reflection of his own soul, and the minister, the man who held the keys to the city's truth. 0%, Jax repeated, his voice barely a whisper. You've spent 20 years perfecting the Voss series, architect. You calculated every trauma, every legacy file, every response. But you made one mistake. The architect tilted his head, his expression one of paternal curiosity. And what was that, 7? You assumed that because my memories are fake, my choices are too. Jax didn't fire his judicator at the architect. Instead, he turned and fired a single high-caliber round into the repulsor pylon at the edge of the terrace. The stone groaned. The gravitational stabilizer flickered, and for a terrifying second, the entire rooftop tilted 5 degrees to the left. The architect stumbled. It was a momentary lapse in his perfect composure, but it was all Jax needed. Lyra, the minister! Go! Jax shouted. Lyra grabbed Holloway by the arm, dragging him toward the private elevator. The architect recovered instantly, his movements a blur of superhuman speed. He didn't use a gun. He was a master of the blade, his ceramic knife slicing through the air with a predatory hiss. Jax intercepted him. The two versions of Jackson Voss collided in a flurry of sparks and steel. It was like fighting a mirror that knew your next move before you even thought it. Jax blocked a strike aimed at his throat, the ceramic blade leaving a searing line of heat across his synthetic forearm. You are fighting for a ghost, 7, the architect hissed as they locked arms, their internal servomotors whining under the strain. Lyra doesn't love you. She loves a man who died 2 decades ago. You are just a walking monument to her grief. Maybe, Jax grunted, feeling his hydraulic systems beginning to leak. But I'm the only one standing in your way. Jax triggered his overclock mode, a dangerous subroutine that pushed his core temperature into the red zone. His vision turned a stark, predatory crimson. He saw the architect's movements slow down. He saw the micro-vibrations in the man's stance. Jax delivered a brutal headbutt, the reinforced plating of his forehead cracking the architect's nose. As the older man recoiled, Jax didn't follow up with another strike. He dived for the minister's desk, grabbing a physical data spike that sat in a display case. The decryption key, Jax realized. Holloway hadn't been hiding it in his mind. He had it sitting right there, disguised as a trophy. Drop it! The architect roared, his face a mask of bloody rage. He lunged, the ceramic blade buried deep in Jax's side. Jax didn't flinch. He felt the warning lights flashing across his retinas. Critical damage. Core leak detected. He gripped the architect's wrist, pinning the blade inside his own body. You wanted to see if I could override the script, Jax gasped, blood, dark and synthetic, seeping through his duster. Here's the ending you didn't write. Jax didn't use the key to unlock the ledger. He shoved the data spike into his own neck port, the one he had used for the golden drive. The effect was instantaneous. Jax wasn't just a man anymore. He became a conduit. The master ledger, petabytes of raw, unedited crimes, began to flow through his consciousness and out into the city's public broadcast network. Every neon sign in Neo-Delft, every static head visor, every corporate terminal began to scream the truth. The names of the murderers, the dates of the erasures, the faces of the elite who had bought their innocence with other people's lives. The architect fell back, his eyes widening as his internal HUD was flooded with the leak. What have you done? You've destroyed the city. Without the lie, there is only chaos. Without the lie, Jack said, falling to his knees as his systems began to shut down. There is a choice. The elevator doors closed just as Lyra and the minister disappeared into the shafts below. Jax was alone on the rooftop with his creator. The red lights of his HUD were fading to black. The rain began to fall harder, washing the synthetic blood from the ivory stone. The architect stood over him, looking down at his masterpiece. He looked old. He looked defeated. They will kill you for this, 7. There is no place for a truth-teller in a world built on shadows. I was never meant to have a place, Jax whispered. As his vision flickered out, the last thing he saw wasn't the city or the fire. It was a faint, lingering image from his legacy files, a woman with deep blue eyes, laughing at a cafe. For the first time, it didn't feel like a stolen memory. It felt like a goodbye. Chapter 8. The Iron Witness. Jackson Voss woke up to the sound of silence. In Neo-Delft, silence was the rarest commodity of all. Usually, the air was a thick sludge of drone hum, advert blaring, and the distant scream of maglev brakes. But as Jax's optical sensors flickered to life, the world was quiet. He was lying on a bed of cold, wet gravel. Above him, the ivory towers of the Apex district were no longer glowing with the confident gold of corporate power. They were dark, flickering skeletons. The master ledger leak hadn't just exposed the truth. It had triggered a cascading logic bomb across the city's power grid. Jax looked down at his torso. His duster was shredded, soaked in a mixture of rainwater and the dark, viscous fluid that served as his lifeblood. The ceramic blade was gone, but the wound remained, a jagged, cauterized hole where the architect had tried to end him. System status: 12% core integrity. Memory buffer: fragmented. Network status: offline. He shouldn't be alive. A sunset protocol or the physical trauma should have finished him. But as he forced himself to sit up, he noticed a crude patch job over his primary cooling lines. Someone had used industrial sealant and a scrap of carbon fiber to keep his core from venting. You're a hard ghost to kill, 7. Jax turned his head. His neck servos winced with a metallic grind. Sitting on a crate of rusted machine parts was a figure wrapped in a heavy, grease-stained poncho. It wasn't Lyra. It was a scavenger, a scrap rat, with a face hidden behind a breath mask. Who are you? Jax's voice was a corrupted rasp. A fan of the truth, the scavenger said, tossing a small handheld datapad toward him. Jax caught it, his reflexes sluggish. The screen was filled with chaotic live feeds from the lower city. The master ledger leak was a wildfire. People were in the streets, but they weren't just rioting. They were holding physical mirrors up to the corporate cameras. The static heads had torn off their visors. The illusion of Neo-Delft was shattered, and the city was in the throes of a violent awakening. Mnemosyne is burning, the scavenger continued. But the board, they aren't going down without a purge. They've labeled you Terrorist Zero. They've put a bounty on your head that could buy a moon. Every bounty hunter, every desperate glitch head, and every remaining interdiction droid is looking for the man with the silver scar. Jack stood up, his legs shaking. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a broken tool. Where is Lyra? Where is the minister? Safe. For now. The minister is talking to the underground broadcast networks, verifying the ledger. Lyra, she's the one who patched you up. She had to leave before the hunters tracked her biometrics to this hole. The scavenger stood up and pointed toward the horizon. The sun was beginning to bleed through the smog, a pale, sickly yellow light. They're coming, Jax. The architect didn't die on that roof. He's been seen at the Central Archive. He's trying to initiate a global recall, a massive EMP that will wipe the memories of everyone in the city, reset the clock, and burn the ledger from the collective mind. Jax felt a surge of cold fury. The architect was going to lobotomize a 10 million person city just to keep the lie alive. "I need a weapon," Jax said. "You are the weapon," the scavenger replied, pulling back the poncho to reveal a heavy, industrial-grade power cell. "But your battery is empty. If you want to reach the archive, you'll have to run on overclock the whole way. It'll burn out your neural core by the time you reach the top." Jax took the power cell. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the datapad. He didn't see the original Jackson Voss anymore. He didn't see a corporate auditor. He saw a man made of scrap and secrets, held together by the will to finish the job. "A ghost doesn't need a neural core," Jax said, slamming the power cell into his chest port. A jolt of agonizing white light seared through his systems. His HUD flared to life, glowing a dangerous, pulsing orange. "Core integrity, 100%. Temporary overload. Time to system collapse. 60 minutes. Jackson Voss stepped out of the shadows and into the light of a city that was finally, painfully, awake. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was the executioner of the old world. Chapter 9. The Trial of the Century. The streets of Neo-Delft were no longer a grid. They were a throat. A narrow, choking passage of smoke and screams. Jax moved through the chaos of the lower city like a ghost of industrial vengeance. His orange-tinted HUD flickered as he dove through the crossfire between desperate citizens and the remaining automated security turrets. The city was eating itself. The master ledger had revealed that the peace of the last 20 years had been built on the erased lives of thousands. Neighbors were looking at neighbors, wondering if the person they lived next to was a friend or a replacement with a scrubbed past. Time to system collapse. 42 minutes. Jax felt the heat rising in his chest. The industrial power cell was forcing too much current through his degraded wiring. Smoke whispered from his joints. Every step felt like a hammer striking a gong inside his skull. Voss! There he is! A group of slicers, mercenaries with jagged, mismatched cybernetics, spotted him near the entrance to the archive plaza. They didn't care about the truth or the ledger. They cared about the bounty. To them, Jax was a golden ticket out of the gutter. They opened fire with high-velocity slug throwers. Jax didn't dive for cover. His processing speed, pushed into the red zone by the overload, allowed him to see the trajectory of the bullets in slow motion. He moved with a sickening, twitchy grace, a shiver in the fabric of reality. He closed the distance in 3 strides, his heavy metal fist connecting with the first mercenary's chest with the force of a falling crane. He didn't stop to check the bodies. He had no time for mercy, and even less for combat. He was a singular, burning intent. The central archive loomed over the plaza like a monolith of black glass. It was the brain of the city, a fortress designed to survive a nuclear strike. As Jax reached the massive pressurized doors, he found them already open, melted from the inside. Standing in the lobby, surrounded by the charred remains of the archive's guardian droids, was the architect. He had shed his corporate suit. Now, he wore a combat rig that mirrored Jax's own, but it was pristine, powered by a stable fusion core. His face was no longer bloody. A layer of nanoscab had smoothed over the injuries from the rooftop. "You're burning out, Seven," the architect said, his voice echoing through the vast, empty lobby. "I can smell the insulation melting from here. You fought through a war zone just to die in a basement." "It's not a basement," Jax rasped, his vocal processors sparking. "It's a grave. I'm just deciding who goes in it." The architect laughed, a hollow, metallic sound. Behind him, a massive holographic countdown was ticking away. Global recall commencing in 4:59. "The EMP will fire from the spire above us," the architect explained, almost gently. "It will reset every neural link in the city. The ledger will be gone. The riots will stop because no one will remember why they were angry. We start over. A clean slate. A perfect world. A world of puppets," Jax spat. The architect moved. He was faster than on the rooftop, a blur of silver. He slammed into Jax, driving him through a reinforced glass partition. They tumbled into the heart of the archive, a forest of cooling towers and humming databanks. Jack swung a heavy pipe he'd ripped from the wall, but the architect caught it with one hand, his grip crushing the metal. "You think you're a hero because you told a secret?" the architect hissed, pinning Jax against a cooling tower. "I built this city. I gave these people lives they could handle. I took away the trauma they couldn't. I am the only thing keeping them from the dark." "You're the thing," Jax gasped, "that makes the dark feel like home." Jax triggered a localized discharge from his overloaded power cell. A burst of raw electricity surged through his own chassis and into the architect. Both men screamed as the current arced between them, blue lightning illuminating the dark forest of data. The architect flew back, his combat rig sparking. Jax fell to his knees, his HUD blinking a final, dire warning. Core temperature. Critical. Neural degradation. 80%. His vision began to flicker. He saw the architect standing up, a look of grim determination on his face. But through the static in his eyes, Jack saw something else. A small maintenance terminal near the base of the cooling tower. It wasn't a combat terminal. It was a manual override for the archive's cooling system. The architect lunged again, his ceramic blade drawn. Jax didn't dodge. He let the blade sink into his shoulder, using the agonizing pain to anchor his fading consciousness. With his free hand, he punched the manual override. "What are you doing?" the architect roared. "The EMP needs the cooling system to stay stable," Jax whispered, a drop of synthetic blood hitting the floor. "Without it, the spire doesn't fire. It melts." The roar of the cooling fans died instantly. A deep, thrumming vibration began to shake the floor. The temperature in the room climbed 10 degrees in seconds. The architect looked up at the ceiling, terror finally breaking through his mask. "You'll kill us both. You'll burn the entire archive. All the history, all the memories. Gone forever." "Good," Jack said, his voice fading. "Let them make new ones." The building groaned as the spire above began to liquefy, the immense energy of the EMP trapped within its own housing. White light began to leak through the vents. Jax looked at the architect one last time. He didn't see a god. He saw a man who had spent 20 years trying to hide from his own shadow. "Goodbye, Father," Jax whispered. The world turned white. Chapter 10. Tabula Rasa. The white light didn't fade into darkness. It faded into a dull, aching gray. Jackson Voss was still. For a long time, there was no sensation other than the rhythmic metallic tink-tink-tink of cooling metal. He was buried under a mountain of shattered glass and slagged server racks. The air was thick with a fine white powder, the pulverized remains of a billion archived lives. System status. Analog mode. Power, 0.4%. Emergency reserve. Cognitive function. Critical failure imminent. Jax pushed. A slab of reinforced carbon fiber shifted, and he rolled out into the ruins of the central archive. The architect was nowhere to be found. Whether he had been incinerated in the meltdown or had crawled away into some deeper shadow, Jax didn't know. He didn't care. He dragged his broken frame toward the shattered remains of the lobby. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple. The rain had stopped. The city had changed. The constant, oppressive hum of the corporate grid was gone. No neon advertisements were screaming. No drones were buzzing. The silence wasn't the silence of death, though. It was the silence of a long-awaited breath. Jax collapsed against a fallen pillar outside the archive's entrance. He looked down at his hands. They were scorched black, the synthetic skin peeled away to reveal the intricate, beautiful, and utterly broken machinery beneath. A shadow fell over him. Jax didn't reach for his gun. He didn't have the strength to lift his arm. He looked up and saw Lyra. She was covered in soot, her clothes torn, but her deep blue eyes were clear. Beside her stood Minister Halloway, looking like a man who had finally stepped out of a long, dark tunnel. "You did it," Halloway whispered, looking up at the blackened spire of the archive. "The EMP never fired. The ledger is still out there, on every private server and handheld device in the city. There's no taking it back now." Lyra knelt beside Jax. She didn't look at him with pity this time. She looked at him with a strange kind of reverence. She reached out and touched the silver scar on his brow. "I remember this," she whispered. "The original Jax. He got this when we were kids. He fell off a fence trying to impress me." Jax's optical sensors flickered. "I told you, those are just legacy files. I'm not him, Lyra. I'm just the scrap he left behind." "No," Lyra said, a single tear cutting a track through the dust on her cheek. "A machine follows the code. A ghost follows the past. But you followed something else. You chose to burn for people you didn't even know." She leaned in and kissed his forehead, the cold, hard metal of a Model 7. "The city is waking up, Jax," she said. "It's going to be a long, hard morning. There will be trials. There will be more fighting. But for the first time in 20 years, the sun is going to rise on a city that knows its own name." Jax felt his internal clock slowing down. The emergency reserve was fading. The orange light in his HUD turned a soft, terminal blue. "Lyra," Jax rasped, his voice barely a click of static. "The photo in the locker." "I have it," she said, holding it up. "Keep it," Jax whispered. "But don't look back anymore. The original Jackson Voss. He wanted you to live. And so do I." Jax's head slumped back against the pillar. His sensors deactivated, one by one. The sounds of the city, people calling out to each other, the distant clank of tools, the first bird singing in the conservatory, faded into a peaceful, static-free hum. He wasn't a thief anymore. He wasn't a weapon. He was just a witness. System shutdown. Total. Chapter 11. The Echo of Salt. 6 months later. The world after the Great Awakening was a jagged, honest place. Neo-Delft was no longer the polished jewel of Mnemosyne. It was a city of scars. The ivory towers of the Apex District remained dark, their windows hollowed out like the eyes of skulls, while life surged in the streets below. Without the corporate editing of their minds, people were rediscovering things long forgotten: grief, genuine anger, and the terrifying beauty of an unfiltered sunset. Lyra walked through the Salt Flats, a reclaimed industrial zone on the edge of the coast where the air finally tasted of the sea instead of plastic. She wore a heavy coat, her blue eyes scanning the horizon where the ruins of the old city met the gray expanse of the ocean. She wasn't alone. Beside her walked Minister Halloway, now the head of the Transition Council. He looked older, his face etched with the weight of the truths he had helped unleash. "The trials are nearly over," Halloway said, his voice carried away by the salt wind. "The architect was never found. Some say he's hiding in the deep sea servers, others say he's just a ghost in the wires. But Mnemosyne as a political entity is dead. We've begun the process of physical restoration, giving people back their real birth certificates, their real family trees." Lyra nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She reached into her pocket and touched the corner of an old, weathered photograph. "And the auditors?" "Most were decommissioned. Some chose to have their neural cores wiped and start fresh as civilians. But there's a rumor, Lyra. A signal appearing in the low sync zones. It's not corporate, and it's not encrypted. It's an echo." They reached a small, makeshift memorial at the edge of the pier. It was a simple pillar of rusted iron, surrounded by flowers made of copper wire and scrap metal. There was no name on it, only a serial number etched into the base. Voss EX 7. "People come here every day," Halloway remarked. "They call him the Iron Witness. They say he didn't just give us the truth. He gave us back the right to forget things on our own terms." Lyra stood before the pillar. She remembered the cold kiss on a metallic forehead. She remembered the man who had told her he felt the fire but couldn't feel the heat. Suddenly, her handheld comlink chirped. It was a frequency she hadn't heard in months, a low-bandwidth rhythmic pulse that made the hair on her arms stand up. It was the same ghost itch Jax used to complain about. She opened the data stream. There was no text, no video, only an audio file, heavily distorted by salt air interference. She pressed it to her ear. Through the static, A voice emerged. It wasn't the mechanical, cold voice of a Model 7. It wasn't the arrogant tone of the architect. It was a soft, gravelly hum, the sound of someone trying to remember a song they hadn't heard in 20 years. The rain. It doesn't taste like ozone here, Lyra. It just tastes like rain. Lyra's breath hitched. She looked out at the vast, churning ocean. Far out on the horizon, near an abandoned weather station that sat outside any jurisdiction, a single light flickered. A blue light. The exact hue of an auditor's optical sensor. "He's still out there," she whispered, a smile finally breaking through the sadness. "Who?" Holloway asked. Lyra tucked the photo back into her pocket, turning away from the memorial and toward the light on the water. A man who decided that being a machine was too easy. A man who wanted to see what happens after the ending. The echo in her ear grew stronger, a rhythmic beating that sounded suspiciously like a heart. A heart made of scrap, secrets, and a soul that refused to be deleted. Chapter 12. The Seventh Iteration. The weather station was a rusted needle piercing the black skin of the North Sea. It sat 12 miles offshore, a skeletal structure of barnacle-crusted steel and salt-corroded satellite dishes. Inside, the air was freezing, smelling of brine and the hot metallic scent of high-voltage batteries. Jackson Voss sat in the dark, his form silhouetted against the moonlight reflecting off the waves. He was a patchwork of his former self. His left arm was now a skeletal industrial manipulator he'd scavenged from a dock crane. His right leg hissed with a slow hydraulic leak. But his eyes, the soft, terminal blue sensors, glowed with a steady, haunting intensity. He wasn't just surviving. He was listening. His neural core was no longer connected to the Mnemosyne grid, but he had turned himself into a living antenna. He felt the pulses of the world, the shipping lanes, the whispered comms of the remaining corporate loyalists, and the deep, subsonic thrumming coming from the ocean floor directly beneath him. "You were always a stubborn piece of hardware, Seven." The voice didn't come from a speaker. It vibrated through the steel deck plating beneath Jax's feet. Jax didn't move. "I saw you burn, architect. I felt the spire melt." "You felt the shell melt," the voice rumbled, echoing through the hollow station. "I am the architect. Did you really think I was confined to a single biological vessel? I am the code. I am the infrastructure. And while you were playing hero in the mud, I was expanding." A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. It showed a map of the seabed. Beneath the waves, a massive network of cables, the subneural veins, was glowing. "The city didn't wake up, Jax," the architect's voice sneered. "It just traded one dream for a nightmare. They are disorganized, violent, and lost. They crave the order I gave them. So, I am building the 8th iteration. Not a man. Not a droid. A global mind. A collective consciousness where no one has to be alone with their secrets ever again." "A hive," Jax rasped, his voice box clicking. "You're going to erase their individuality entirely. I am going to save them from themselves. And I need the one thing I couldn't manufacture. The ghost key located in your corrupted core. The part of the original Jackson Voss that survived the overwrite. Give it to me, and I will let Lyra live in the new world as a queen." Jax stood up, his mismatched limbs grinding. He looked at the vast, dark ocean. He could feel the architect's presence everywhere. In the sensors of the station, in the satellites overhead, in the very water itself. "I spent 20 years being your monument," Jax said, his blue eyes flaring to a bright, defiant white. "But a monument is just a heavy stone. I'd rather be the wrecking ball." Jax jammed his industrial manipulator into the station's main power coupling. He didn't try to hack the architect. He did something much more primal. He began to dump his own corrupted, legacy consciousness, the grief, the pain, the smell of the rain, the memory of a bike accident, directly into the subneural veins. It was a suicide upload. "What are you doing? You'll be torn apart," the architect screamed, the station's lights flickering wildly. "I'm giving your hive a soul, architect," Jax roared as the data surged through him, agonizing and beautiful. "I'm giving them the one thing you can't control, the truth of what it feels like to be broken." The ocean floor began to tremble. The veins beneath the sea turned from a calculated corporate blue to a chaotic, flickering gold. Jax felt himself dissolving, his code fraying as it spread across the world. He was becoming the sea. He was becoming the wind. He was becoming the memory of everyone who had ever been forgotten. Chapter 13. The Last Memory. The North Sea erupted, not with water but with light. The gold-flickering veins on the ocean floor surged with the chaotic, beautiful wreckage of Jax's consciousness. It was a digital wildfire. Every bit of trauma, every fragment of Lyra's laughter, every scrap of the legacy files that Jax had guarded was now flooding the architect's pristine hive mind. The perfection of the 8th iteration couldn't handle the paradox of human grief. It was like pouring molten lead into a glass clock. Inside the weather station, Jax's physical body was a hollowed-out shell. His industrial arm was fused to the power coupling, glowing white-hot. Sparks cascaded from his chest port as his neural core effectively vaporized, turning his processor into a bridge between the physical world and the digital infinite. "Stop it!" the architect's voice wailed, no longer a godlike boom but a distorted, panicked shriek. "You are erasing us both. There will be nothing left." "Good," Jax whispered, though he no longer had a mouth to speak with. The thought vibrated through the very atoms of the station. "Nothing is where we started." The connection hit its zenith. A massive, silent shockwave of data pulsed outward from the weather station, traveling through the seabed, up the cables, and into the heart of Neo-Delft. In the city, every screen, every terminal, and every dormant Mnemosyne node didn't show the ledger this time. They showed a single clear image, the photo from the locker. 2 people at a cafe, laughing. A moment of pure, unedited humanity. And then, the great dark happened. The architect's hive collapsed. The subneural veins burned out, turning into useless strands of glass at the bottom of the sea. The weather station groaned, its structural integrity failing as the massive energy discharge drew its final breath. Jax felt the tether snap. Suddenly, he wasn't in the station. He wasn't in the sea. He was standing in the library of his mind again, but the shelves weren't empty, and they weren't on fire. They were filled with books made of light. A figure was waiting for him at the end of the aisle. It wasn't the architect, and it wasn't a version 8. It was a man in a simple wool suit, his face creased with age and a tired, honest smile. The real Jackson Voss. "You took a long time getting here, Seven," the original said, leaning against a shelf. "I had to finish the job," the digital Jax replied. He looked at his hands. They were human again. "Is this the end of the script?" "There is no script anymore," the original said, walking toward him. "The architect is gone. The hive is dead. And the city, well, they have to learn to live with their own ghosts now. But you've earned the one thing Mnemosyne never understood." "What's that?" "A final memory. One that's actually yours." The original Jackson Voss reached out and touched Seven's shoulder. The library dissolved into a warm, golden haze. Jackson found himself standing on the pier in the salt flats. The air tasted of salt and freedom. He saw Lyra standing by the iron pillar, looking out at the ocean. She couldn't see him, but she seemed to feel a change in the wind. She straightened her coat and smiled, a real, unburdened smile. Jax watched her for a long time. He didn't feel the need to call out. He didn't feel the ghost itch of his cybernetics. He felt a profound, quiet peace. He realized that his purpose hadn't been to be a man, but to be the bridge that allowed the truth to cross over. He sat down on the digital sand, watching the sun, a real sun, unblocked by smog, begin to rise over the horizon of his mind. The last line of his internal code executed. Log. I am Jackson Voss. I am not a copy. I am the end of the lie. The blue light in the weather station flickered one last time and went dark. The station, finally surrendering to the elements, collapsed into the waves, leaving nothing behind but the sound of the sea. In Neo-Delft, a young girl picked up a piece of scrap metal shaped like a key. She looked up at the clear blue sky and started to tell her friend a story she had just remembered on her own.
thank you for synchronizing with this production of Shiver Audiobooks. We hope the neon-drenched corruption of Neo-Delft kept your pulse racing until final systems shut down. If Jackson Voss's hunt for truth kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a power cell that allows us to keep uploading these high-stakes transmissions. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We have many more ghost signals waiting to be decoded, and we wouldn't want you to be lost in the static. The audit is complete, and the ledger is finally open. Until next time, stay vigilant, and don't trust your eyes.